simple that works is much better than complicated that doesn't. And the fundamentals of sleep and nutrition and regular exercise is key to success. And I'll finish on one point that I find that we should be intense about our consistency. A line I use is consistency should be your intensity.
Welcome to Tip Top Grow Up Your Business with Metronomics. Join me, Shannon Byrne Susko, and Metronomics certified coach, Jed Roberts.
We'll be talking to business thought leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and business team coaches who have all taken the journey to grow up their businesses to their tip top.
We'll be sharing strategies, systems, stories, and how you can grow your company up at the speed you want.
If you're searching for your path to the tip top and feel your time is running out, then this podcast is for you.
Today, we're joined by Joe O'Connor, lecturer in sport and exercise science at Munster Technological University. That's in Ireland, correct? Whereabouts in Ireland? Joe, whereabouts?
We're in the southwest of Ireland in Kerry.
In Kerry, I love it. Corporate athlete coach and researcher who works on exercise physiology, performance nutrition, and elite athlete profiling. So, one of the big things, Joe has spent years coaching endurance athletes. So that's a little bit of what I love. And really helping busy professionals, including executives and leadership teams, apply the science of elite performance to their work and their lives. And what I love about Joe's work is that it's built on evidence. And that really brings it into play for a lot of us. We're so like, should we do this or not do this? Does this make sense? And Joe's work and research really brings up all of that directly, not only in the sport world, but into the business world. So after all of that, Joe, welcome to Tip Top. Great to have you here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Thank you, Shannon. I really appreciate the introduction and delighted to have our chat, a continuation of our previous chat.
Yes, very much so. And where I'd like to start today to give everyone a little bit of idea of, where you've spent your time and experience and built your career and your academic research, your athlete performance, and now executive performance. What initially drew you into this work and what hooked you about human performance?
Yeah, it's a great question, Shannon, and how far back I go, I suppose how long is a piece of string, but I've always been interested in physical activity, even more so than sport, to be honest. And a lot of that came from an accident when I was quite young. I was your typical sporty kid. Here in Ireland, I played football, Gaelic football, hurling, soccer. I was into athletics and equestrian and swimming. I had everything. But when I was 12, I actually had a fall off a horse pretty badly, and I broke my back in 4 places. And I had a 20% chance of walking again. So from a very young age, I really appreciated physical activity. And if I fast forward a few years, I ended up actually getting a scholarship into college for athletics to study the program I studied at times called Health, Fitness and Leisure Studies. And I loved the breadth of it. And I wanted to do something in physical activity, but my dad was a teacher. I didn't want to be a teacher, which is kind of ironic where we've ended up. And when I went into college, into university, I had this chip on my shoulder that I got in on an athletic basis rather than a cognitive, or I didn't get the points to get into the university. I got in through sport. And I always had this chip on my shoulder with that. And one lecturer pulled me aside and she was a really good shot putter in her day. And she goes, look, Joe, there's loads of types of intelligence. And she opened my mind to, at the time, which was Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. And from a very young time in college, I started making the connection between intelligence profiling and physical activity. And that led me down the road of looking at learning styles as part of my undergraduate research. And it led me then onto actually getting into coaching roles quite young as well. And I firmly believe that my passion for coaching came from the physical activity that was helping the person perform better at the sport. And then I applied that same principles to my own academia, and I did okay and went down and pursued a master's in nutrition. And, what excited me was always that connection between how the brain excels when we're happy, but it also excels when we're healthier and we've more energy and our diet is right and our sleep and all that connection came together. And I ended up working in high performance sport across a number of sports, our native sports here in hurling
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
big sport. I've reached really good heights with that with my home county and other counties as well. And I worked at the Olympics in athletics and equestrian sport and in golf. But I think what brings it all together, Shannon, and makes it relevant to our conversation today is that link between cognition and health and physical activity.
Yeah.
As a business owner myself, I set up a business and thankfully was able to exit that business. So had the hands-on experience of going through COVID and running different aspects of the business on my own and dealing with that. And whenever I got under pressure, I always turned to checking in on my sleep and being able to switch off through physical activity and through exercise. And no different to yourself. I compete in triathlon now, and that's my off button. Yeah, there's many aspects. I hope we can go down through that, but I suppose that's
Yes.
a word of where I've ended up today. I suppose my research right now, I'm doing a professional doctorate in human performance and innovation, and specifically,
Yes. Love
to
it.
give you the long title, I'm looking at C-suite executives and senior business leaders, our CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, etc.,
Yeah.
how their health, fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle habits can influence their cognitive performance. Without going down a rabbit hole too early in this interview, I feel with AI taking over a lot of the machine learning tasks that people have nowadays, that knowledge isn't necessarily the USB that it used to be. But I
Yeah.
really value, no different to yourself. My research is looking at how can I have clarity and how can I have creativity and how can I have curiosity? Those three C's, because I think without those, we don't know what to ask this machine learning to do for us. Different to Metronomics, it's about clear, repeatable, a process to success. Very similar terminology.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yeah. I no, I love that. Fascinating because of the way you've brought it together from, I love the way you start your story, and what happened to you. All these things for all of us, take us on a journey and we have to be open for that journey.
Yeah.
The research that you've done, because you've done lots of research along the way and you have your current research. I'd love to just get a little deeper into, because when we research something, we learn, and then we're curious about something else, and we have the next question, and then we're curious, and we have the next question. How did the level of, the research, the level of precision of that research shape your thinking about performance, not only in sport, but in business? Like, how did it
Yeah,
shape it along the way? Because I'm sure it's gone through a few evolutions on what you originally thought to what you think today and what you're exploring.
absolutely. And I kind of give you my backstory of my value on physical
Yeah,
activity, which is important for all. But I took a pretty typical route in industry, worked as a fitness instructor and a personal trainer, and then worked in
yeah,
commercial fitness and had my commercial fitness business.
right.
Uh, you know, COVID was probably a pivot point for me, in that I would have set up Coach Fact, my current corporate athlete business in 2015. But
Yes,
basically, what I had a commercial fitness going, I had the corporate athlete business going, and I was lecturing and I was working in high performance sports. So I had too many balls in the air. But the mechanism of coping with all that was basically what I coach and research. I find it
right,
fascinating. We can actually take more on, and we need that challenge, we need that stress to actually help us to grow as long as we match it with appropriate rest. And what I
right,
found with that pivot is I was fascinated with how COVID, and I'm not too sure how it worked in Canada, Shannon, but here in Ireland, we had a system where a lot of your employees were put on what was called a TWSS. In simple terms, they were paid to stay at home, and us
yeah,
employers were encouraged to keep the people on the system, but keep your business open and
right,
keep your insurance or
yeah,
keep your business closed, excuse me, but keep paying your rent and keep paying
yes,
insurance and all that. I had no choice but to bring my two businesses together and
yeah,
to deliver commercially online again. And so I was taking CEOs and just normal people who go to the gym and mixing them together online. And what I begin to find is that a lot of the characteristics that separated really high performers were almost polarizing to people who just wanted to go to the gym. And one of the big pivots I found is that high performers at the C-suite executive level really look at health and fitness more so as a tool rather than a solution. And what I
right,
found A lot of people say, I can use this to improve my focus and my concentration. A lot of really successful business leaders are used to sticking to a process and having
Yeah.
strategic long-term goals. And this was really leading in. That pivot came for me. I was kind of going during COVID, I need to research this more. I want to
Yeah.
find where the evidence is at the C-suite level, at the senior business level. And at junior management and frontline workers, there's loads of research. And it works around the wellness team of wellness
Right.
initiatives in the workplace. But what I found is nobody was really looking after the leaders.
Yeah.
Who's minding the minder or who's
Yeah.
leading the lead? And what I found is that there was a niche in that area that I was personally very much interested in. And there was a bit of a break in the research. A lot of the things that are sold to business leaders and C-suite executives in relation to health and fitness, nutrition and lifestyle,
Yes.
a lot of that research is based on other people and not necessarily on business leaders, because business leaders think different a lot of the time. Uh,
Yes.
I find a lot of people in my area, a lot of people in sales in general, will hide behind complexity. So if they make something really complicated and falutin, it must be hard to understand. So I'll just buy and believe. Whereas the reality of it, and my research is showing this, that simple that works is much better than complicated that doesn't. And the
Yeah.
fundamentals of sleep and nutrition and regular exercise is key to success. And I'll finish on one point that I find that we should be intense about our consistency. A line I use is consistency should be your intensity.
Yes.
And that's the key to long-term health for business leaders, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a huge believer in consistency. You and I were having a conversation about it the last time that we got together around and I actually, before I showed up to my triathlon probably a month ago now, the
Uh-huh.
only thing that got me to that start line was just the consistency of showing up for every training session and just coming in with a mindset. Not maybe my body wasn't quite working right yet, but it was
Mhm.
just showing up and keeping the rhythm of
Yeah.
what the training should be.
There's so many parallels to running a business as well, isn't there? Some days you
Yes.
got go up the business and you're not firing on all cylinders for whatever reason, but you got to show up every day. You know, the three pillars of Metronomics really spoke to me about tools and frameworks and
Yes.
the keyword rhythm. And we just
Yes.
need to keep the rhythm. And sometimes it needs a little bit more push, and sometimes it needs to back off a little bit, but the rhythm needs to be found.
A lot of people don't know why we used a metronome when it came to this methodology and this system. And when I was writing my first book, and it ended up being called The Metronome Effect, because the outcome was based upon the rhythm that myself as a CEO set. But I was really
Mhm.
stuck on a name. And we had the whole manuscript done. It was ready. We still didn't have a title and we still didn't have anything to do with a cover yet. So I decided to go for a run at lunchtime and I put my Garmin on,
Uh-huh.
my Garmin watch, and getting it ready for my run, and I mishit a button and I ended up on a button on a Garmin. If you have a Garmin, if you're listening in and you have a Garmin, you have a metronome on your Garmin, and you can set the cadence of what you're going to be doing, your run. And so I went for the run. I stumbled upon the metronome. I went for the run. I came back. I went to my desk and I was still like, oh, what are we going to call this?
Mhm.
And that's where the metronome came, the metronome effect. And the funny thing is, everyone goes, you must be musical. And I was like, no, it came from athletics. I mean, yes, I definitely understand how a metronome works. I definitely played piano for 10 plus years. And my
Uh,
teacher would set the metronome, but the metronome comes from the CEO setting the rhythm, setting the cadence, setting the consistency of that. Whether, yeah, I love that. Whether you just got to show up. Like when you say
yeah.
you're going to show up, you got to bring your best self, whatever that is that day, but you have to show up on the rhythm.
And I
And
think that rhythm in human physiology, we might not call it a metronome, but we might call it oscillation, where you're moving from one area
yeah,
to over and back. And it's not my work; it's the work of Steve Magnus and Brad Stulberg came up with the growth equation. And if we want to grow, we actually need stress and rest. So it's stress
yeah,
plus rest equals growth, and we're oscillating. like a metronome,
Yep.
between periods of stress and periods of rest. And often people ask me, what's the difference between an elite athlete and an elite business performer? Well, there's often two, that an athlete will plan when to rest. They rest in order to perform better because it's part of the
Yeah.
plan. Whereas a lot of business leaders rest because they have to rest. They didn't have their oscillation or their metronome right, as they kept push till they have to, rather
Yeah.
than push, rest. And that's how we move up, or we progress. And that growth equation is very important. And, a metric that you might pick up on your Garmin or other devices as well is heart rate variability.
Yeah.
And without getting too techie on this, but it's so to the point, heart rate variability is looking at the variability between two heartbeats, but it's really looking at the relationship between your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system. So parasympathetic is rest and digest, and sympathetic then is going to be fight or flight. Now, both are very important, but we need to move from one to the other numerous times throughout the day. If you're in a chronic state of stress and you're always working, you're going to stay in that fight or flight response.
Right.
And that's where
Right.
we produce high levels of cortisol. Stress hormones are related to the four horsemen, which are cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, metabolic disease like diabetes, and cancers. So it's actually very important to plan our downtime, to have that oscillation between work and rest, and to get our metronome going from push to rest to push to
Yeah, I
rest.
love
So,
that.
so important. And like you and I, we're cut from the same cloth, and that we have a similar thing that turns us off from work, which is triathlon
Yes.
endurance.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be sport as well, Shannon.
No.
Sometimes just go for a walk, or just go for your meet with your friends, or what is your off? And when I'm onboarding a new client, and no different to yourself, you like to know if we're a good fit before we work together.
Yes.
That's one of the
Yep.
questions. What do you do to switch off? I actually have it in my current survey as well. Literally as bold as that. What do you do to switch
Yeah.
off? And an awful
Yeah.
lot of people struggle to answer that question, which tells me there's a problem with their
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah. And, the ultimate of what we think about when we're on and off, on and off. I know a lot of CEOs, leaders are on and they think they always have to be on because of the risk or where their business is or what's going on and all those pieces.
Mhm.
And, one of the reasons why, the metronome and the metronomics methodologies there for business is to actually, help the leaders as a team find the balance they need
Yeah.
and find the balance they need between, business, team, and life. Because we
Mhm.
know when business or team is out of balance, your life becomes out of balance. Your downtime becomes out of balance. You give it all up,
Yeah.
and that actually sets us up for to be in a more risky position than not, as you know, and we know that from sport. But it's not as obvious when it comes to business. What are some of the maybe the common blockers you see in the corporate athlete that are probably surprisingly similar to the athletic performance blockers, but that
Mhm.
you're seeing that maybe the corporate athlete doesn't see as
Yeah.
blockers, or, that you have to sort of talk them through to get there.
Yeah, I think the hustle culture is something in the business world. We call it the
Yeah.
hustle culture, or in the athletic world, we call it just the turned on, the excited
Yeah.
mode, always thinking about their sport or always thinking about their activity.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much the case of the corporate athlete as well. And,
Yes.
that reminds me of the research of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah.
He's a Hungarian sports psychologist, or not sports psychologist, a Hungarian psychologist. And anyone that's listening might be familiar with a state of flow or being in the zone. And if you looked at his research, particularly in the area of creativity, he spoke about the top most creative people on the planet. And they're three things, that the three-step process, that they're excellent at immersion. They're really good at immersing themselves in a project, to the point that
Yeah.
they may not be aware of the phone ringing in the room at the same time. But secondly, and just as importantly, they're excellent at incubation, in that they can turn off and completely go away from a task and be clear of it in their mind. And then the third phase is where that eureka comes in, or that aha moment. But
Yeah.
the genius would have never come out if it wasn't stimulated with the immersion, and if it
Right.
wasn't incubated in that incubation period. That's when the genius comes out. Whereas a fault in the corporate world is people keep pushing and pushing, and people tend to get busier and busier and busier, and less.
Yes.
And as they
Yes.
get productive, they push harder, and it's only turning the slope more vertical.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would be of the opinion that when you have a system and a process and a plan and a strategy, that you say, I'm going to work hard and then I'm going to deload. Like this idea of checking emails at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning, no, you should be off. You should be switching off.
Yes. Yeah.
I find some of my most successful clients and some of the most successful research that I come across, people are very good at segmenting that. I'm on and I'm off, and now I'm creative. But the
Yeah.
creativity won't come without the off. But there's no point being off if you actually haven't charged. So I'm not
Yeah.
one to say, avoid stress, let's avoid challenge. If you're running your own business, there's always stress, there's always challenge, but there's a
Yeah.
skill in being off. And I think long-term planning, like in your book, please, it's 3 HAG, isn't it? The 3 year.
Yeah. That's, we call that the near term, and the long term is 10 to 30 year.
Yeah. So this is what I'm talking about. If I can look 3 years down the road, it's easy in athletics for me because I
Yeah.
could be working with an athlete who's thinking in a 4-year cycle for the
Yes. Yeah.
Olympics.
That's
Right.
exactly where it came from. Did you know
Yeah,
that?
okay, I didn't know that.
Because of the
But
quadrennial, right? The quadrennial. Yeah.
My point being is that, okay, I want to be here in 3 years. So where do I need to be in 2 years? And where do I need to be in 1 year?
Yeah.
And where do I need to be in 2 weeks to get there? Now, you can't just go at 1,000 miles an hour all the way through. You have to plan the undulations like
Yeah.
we were talking about,
Yeah.
and planning that rest. And whenever I'm talking to a business leader or if I'm doing a corporate talk on site, I often use the example of people. And wherever we are talking, if it was in Canada, I might talk about ice hockey, and we
Right.
talk about preseason. Everyone, yeah, that makes sense. And pre-competitive season where you've got a smaller competition leading into the big competition. Then you got competition, peak competition, and then you got the finals, and then you got
Yeah.
a transition period, and then you have the off season. And everyone in the room just nods agreeingly, saying that
Yes.
all makes sense. I goes, well, do you do that with your health, with your performance,
Yeah.
and with your business? Because you
Yeah.
should. Because if I
Yeah.
take those hockey players, I
Yeah.
can't train them every day and get them to compete every 3 to 4 days again, and they're eventually going to break. And everyone
Yeah.
they look at me with patronizing eyes saying, that's so obvious, Joe. And I'm returning the favor going, and it's so obvious for your health also.
Yeah. It's so, yeah, the 3 HAG came from my experience in sport and playing on high performing teams and, making a team that had a goal that 3 years out. And it wasn't an Olympic goal at that point, but we were in the same cadence as that. And
Yeah.
so in the first year of the quadrennial, it's getting the team organized, getting everything together. And then there's, 3 years, 12 quarters to the big, championship, to the big show. So that's where it came from. And thinking about the balance that's required, both for your skills, your team, your mental, and your body life, and as an athlete, right? It's so interesting because in sport, we can't do it all day long.
No.
In business, we think, oh yeah, we can do it all day long.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. And we're going to be so good if we do it all day long. And we're not. We get worse as we go.
You're going to crash and burn. And that's where the nutrition comes in, like real practical nutrition, good quality sleep and lifestyle factors, whether that be mindfulness or meditation or some time to make you mentally fit as well as
Yeah.
physically fit. And I often use the phrase fit to perform. So performance is relative. What
Yeah.
do you want to
Yeah.
perform at? Whether that's cognitive performance, physical performance, emotional, societal performance. Actually, one interesting thing that's coming out in my research at the moment is that I ask a question around the cognitive domains, and I use 7 different cognitive domains. And the question is simple: which of these do you really value? And executive functioning comes out on top, so decision making and rational thinking, etc. But what comes out number 2 is socio-cognition, the ability to read the room and have a sense of empathy. And this is coming at the moment. I have about 320 CEOs and business leaders who have completed this survey. And I think that's testament to how business and life is changing, that we
Right.
got to be able to read the room as well as make good decisions.
Yes.
How could you
Yes.
do that if you're suffering from brain fog and if you don't have a lot of clarity and if you don't have a lot of creativity? I don't think you can do that at a very high level. And I suppose one subsection, and my apologies, Shannon, I'm bouncing around, and it's something that I purposely put into the survey, but it's really growing late, is around the female C-suite executive and
Yes.
senior business leader, and in particular, how menopause is an
Yes.
added challenge to really successful females in business. And I have a series of open questions in there, and some of the information I get back is fantastic. But what it shows is that these questions haven't been asked specifically of female business leaders. We've looked at menopause almost as in, right, how do we deal and how do we cope?
Yes.
Which
You
is
know,
fair. But
yeah.
if I'm to a type A personality, I don't know, maybe ones I'm talking to right now who said, and I say, okay, it's going to be all warm and fuzzy and I'm going to look after you. And you're like, no, hell no. I want to run my business and I want to be
Yeah.
successful. And this menopause thing is something that's happening and I'm
Yeah.
going to deal with it and I'm going to put a plan in place. So just another side rant. So my apologies
Well,
again.
I think it's really all of that's important because I think up to a certain point, it was just, get your head down, get your work done, achieve your goals, good job. And then, a lot of people retired, walked away. I run into CEOs and leaders who are exhausted.
Yeah.
Exhausted. And a lot of the CEOs we run into are exhausted and just want to sell their business, just want to get unengaged from that business. They spent 30 years in that business and they're exhausted. And the whole idea is to find a rhythm, find a cadence, find the system that's going to give that CEO and the leaders time back, right? Because
Yeah.
time's our worst enemy and time is scarce, and give time back in order to get your life back. It sounds so cliche. And I'd say even 5 years ago, people were like, oh, that's brutal. That's never going to happen. You can't build a business and have a life too. Well, we know we can do that. It's actually why I live in Whistler, British Columbia, and have built, more than 3 businesses out of there and not missed a ski season. How's that?
But
Right.
that's textbook for me though. That's finding the balance, and that's why you're such a high performer as well. I actually been working on a taking on the FIRE movement. What is it? Financially
Yeah.
independent, retire early, and I took a little
Yes.
twist on it. And I was on a couple of other previous podcasts where I spoke about this FIRE movement. How about the idea, Shannon, that if we were physically independent and retired, energized, so that when you
Yes.
do move into your third act, you have a level of,
Yeah.
you've set up your business, you've sold your business, you're hyper successful. But what good is that if you can't physically enjoy the ski season? Or
Right.
why, if you can't go to your grandson's or granddaughter's baseball game, why can't
Yeah.
you physically can't do it? You're not physically independent. And do you have the energy to travel? And when I present on this particular area, I have a lovely picture. Well, lovely. I have a couple who are on a gondola in Venice, a retired
Yes.
couple, and a lifelong dream, but the two of them are sound asleep. They're asleep
Oh,
in their lifelong dream of going to Venice on a gondola. And that
yeah.
typifies me. What's the point? Why do it
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
don't have the energy to live your life during and
Yeah.
afterwards?
Yeah.
I think that's critical.
Critical. We are so aligned on that. And this is a lot of people who know me know that this is my third act. This is retirement for me. Everything I love to do is, I always call it my seniors golf tour. I get to talk to incredible people like you and work with CEOs and make an impact so that we can bring that energy back into, you know, high performers or people who want to high perform or have been high performing but don't know how to sustain it. And not only for now, but for everything you want to do in life. And when I think about this, what's the one practice? Maybe you're going to say, oh my God, Shannon, what are you asking me this question for? But what is the one practice that moves the needle for the most ambitious, high achieving leaders? What's the one? So they're out there, they're doing it, they're not feeling the balance, they're out of balance. Let's just say, what's one thing that starts to move the needle when you start working with corporate athletes, actually a regular athlete, but let's go corporate athlete. What would
Yeah.
it be?
I think corporate athlete, and it's going to sound simple, but simple that works is better than complicated that doesn't. And probably the one thing that moves the needle more than anything else is sleep, and then the domino effect that follows. And I
Yeah.
would regularly monitor all my clients, their resting heart rate and their heart rate variability and their sleep duration. For me, it's the quality of that sleep. And unfortunately, Shannon, we don't have the technology outside of a lab to monitor sleep quality as much as a lot of the wearable companies might let us think that we do. That's probably the one that moves the dial most. Of
I love
course,
it.
exercise is critical. Of course, nutrition, of course, mindfulness and meditation and, being at one with your own mental health and everything. But without sleep, none
Yeah.
of those are able to kick into gear. Down to simple things like your metabolism. Like people struggle with their body weight. They're like, why aren't I metabolizing fat? Well, without sufficient sleep. And if you're not going, there's 4 different
Right.
zones of sleep. And that zone 4 sleep is where we produce testosterone and growth hormone and insulin-like growth hormone. But it's also where we flush out that stress hormone, cortisol. And we might only get 15, 20% of our night in deep sleep if we've got good sleep hygiene. So what I find is people don't respect sleep hygiene and they don't respect
Yeah.
sleep duration. And then they use methods like, a couple of drinks, a couple of beers, a glass of wine. But alcohol is a major inhibitor to sleep.
Yeah.
We
It'll just
might
make it worse.
Big time, big time.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to alcohol, I often make reference to the biopsychosocial model of health, which is a model
Yeah.
of health that a lecturer introduced me to in college back in the 90s. And it states that we need to find balance between our biology, our psychology, and our sociology. So, like, one of my best mates lives in Canada, in Montreal. So we don't get to meet that much. So when you come back, it might be the only time of year that I'll have a couple of beers. Now, biologically, there is nothing good I can tell you about that scenario. But the psychosocial benefits of meeting up with a
Yeah.
mate and having a few beers and just having a chat, that's health too.
Yes.
Well, but
Yes.
alcohol inhibits sleep. Blue light inhibits sleep. And as some people come back to me, and I'm sure there's people watching or listening to this right now, Shannon, going, aha, what about my red light blocker glasses? And I go, you're still up
Yes.
at 2 in the morning checking your emails. You're not asleep.
Yeah.
Just because you're
Yeah.
blocking the blue light doesn't mean you're asleep. So it's a hard question. Thanks, Shannon. It's a hard question, but that's the one that moves the dial most.
Yeah.
And it's the one I value personally most.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. When people ask me, even in the early days when we didn't have the metronomic system in place and we didn't have the things we know, people ask me sort of, you know, what's your superpower? And I'd say my superpower is actually sleep, my ability to get really good sleep. In the early days, I probably wasn't sleeping enough, but to get really good sleep. And now, now that you need X amount of sleep, there's so many tools out there to actually measure your sleep, whether they're great or not. They're not in the lab, but at least everyone's talking about
Yes.
sleep. And I don't think enough people know the superpower of sleep in a way that other, entrepreneurs, high performing CEOs who are like behind or they're not hitting their goals. What happens? They lose sleep. They actually give up sleep to win the game, and it's actually slowing the game down, or it won't be able to sustain the game without some kind of catch up on sleep. And we know we can't catch up on sleep. There's no catch up on sleep,
No,
right?
and banking it isn't really backed by
No.
research. But it goes back. I previously mentioned about heart rate variability, and heart rate
Yes.
variability echoes through all my research because I can link it to VO2 max and cognitive
Yeah.
performance and metabolic health. But when I'm working with a client and when I'm presenting or researching in this area, heart rate variability will tell us there's a problem coming before we know there's a problem coming. You can see that number dropping, or you can see your
Yeah.
red climbing up. And successful clients will often see this and be proactive. A lot of people are reactive to their health. I think to be an elite corporate athlete, you got to be proactive and you got to plan
Yes.
your rest and plan your work, but also be reactive to things that your body is telling you. I think, having been a business owner myself, Shannon, I would have pushed through hard because I had to push through hard, and we almost
Yeah.
wear it as a badge of honor. But when your system is going well and you have a business going well, and you can begin to see that your own health metrics are beginning to creak, maybe it's time to back off that little bit there, or maybe it's time to go for a walking meeting rather than another,
Yeah.
boardroom meeting. Simple
Yeah.
measures. And it goes back to my phrase about, you should be intense about your consistency. Consistency
Yes.
should be your intensity. Regularly looking at that. I remember years ago reading the Tim Ferriss book, The 4 Hour Work Week, and he spoke about
Yeah.
micro retirements and breaking your year up. It's not always possible. And, it's not always feasible, but maybe it doesn't have to be a week in India. Maybe it could be just, let's get home 2 hours early and do a decompression walk. I have some clients, I recommend that. I had one client maybe about 5 years ago now, and he used to go, Joe, like one of my biggest problems is when I go home, I'm not switching off, and my wife and kids are getting the brunt of my frustrations that I'm not at work. So one exercise we
Yeah.
brought in, was, right, can you finish work an hour earlier and go for a walk so that you can decompress?
Yeah.
And an activity he started doing, he had a dictaphone back when dictaphones were a thing. Now
Yeah.
it's on your phone now. Yeah, and he would just voice out all his troubles, voice out all his hate, and say, right, on Monday, I'm going to do boom, 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 boom. He offloaded, and straight away the regeneration started. And when he would come back on a Monday, he'd hit it at 1,000 miles an hour, but he became very disciplined at switching off at the weekends. At
Yeah.
that, he
Yeah.
became a high performer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that because even, I'm not as skilled or knowledgeable or any of those pieces, but even from my own experience of, being in those situations, the one thing, we know with any CEO going through, if they're going through a transaction of selling their business, they're going through like high stress, you got to get out and move. You got to
Yeah.
move. You got to move. It's good for your body, good for your brain, good for your family, good for all those things. And we think about that, like that sounds really, really simple, but it's one of the things that I close off my calls with my CEOs with is, when is the last time, are you getting your consistent movement in? It sounds
Or-
ridiculous,
Mm.
but it doesn't matter what it is.
I think the sell for really successful people is to give it a purpose. And I suppose in a nutshell, that's my research. I want to be able to
Yeah.
convince CEOs that 10, 15-minute walk at the end of your week or the end of your day or the end of your lunch break or whatever actually serves a purpose so that you will perform better. And there's an added benefit. If
Yeah.
that becomes a habit and a ritual, I spoke earlier about chronic disease. Chronic disease takes 20, 30 years to embed. It's not acute. You don't
Right.
get sick overnight. Those accumulations of good habits around exercise and nutrition will help you perform better here, now, and today, but will also build the foundations for future health into your third act. You don't
Yeah.
just get to 60 and decide to be healthy. You got to have habits that will build on and that will build the foundations for long-term health. And I'm really excited around health span and the longevity movement, where we're looking at excelling in health for our whole life. And there's a big difference between lifespan and health span. And I think that's where
Yes.
leaders need to move to next. Why
Yeah.
am I doing all this if I can't live the fruits of all my work?
Right. So let's just say, in thinking about some practical takeaways for CEOs and listeners who are, watching, listening this podcast, and maybe leaders haven't been as consistent, rhythmical, balanced, been, really pulled into their business for a long time. What's the very first step that you'd have them take? Because we can start this anytime, right?
Yeah.
We can start this anytime. We just need to start and keep it consistent. What would be the very first step you'd get them to take?
Well, it's a bit of a hard hitter, Shannon, but I often ask them the why. Why would you do this?
Mm,
And I really look at long-term aging as why you would do this, both from a cognitive perspective and a physical perspective. And if that becomes your motivator, it's
yeah,
quite easy then to put a plan in place. And I give some examples about, let's just say you've got grandkids and you want to be able to pick up a grandkid who will on average be about 12 kgs.
yeah,
It's not as detailed as this, but just to make the point, that would mean, and we're going to lose about 10% of our strength per decade as we age. That means you should be able to lift 15 kgs nowadays if you want to be able to lift your future grandkids. That's the why. I want you to
yeah,
do it. It will help you here and now and then. From there, there's a difference between what we should do and what we can do. That's the second step.
yeah,
I say, well, what can you do? And most people are surprised that how little can be
yeah,
really effective, you
yeah,
know? And people go, well, I don't exercise because I don't have an hour and a half to go to the gym. But in reality, who's got an hour and a half to go to the
yeah,
gym? you know but do you have 10 minutes? Do you have 8 minutes?
yeah.
Some people might be familiar with Tabata circuits as a type of
Yes,
training. Dr.
yes,
Izumi Tabata was a Japanese researcher, and he found that we could improve our aerobic capacity and our anaerobic capacity with 4 minutes work, which is
yeah. Amazing.
easy. So what can you do? And I often look at the work of Roy Baumeister, who looks at comparison, and you might have heard of the phrase comparison is the test of joy. And
Yes.
he looks at the why people's willpower fails. And it's because people are comparing themselves too often to other people. So I often tell people we have to stop that and let's really double down on where are the opportunities for you to do something. Let's tell me in the week where you're to do something and work back from there. And you know, Shannon, as well, once you start training, you get more energy. When you burn
Yes.
energy, you create energy. So let's just burn a twig first of all. Let's just
Yeah.
burn a tiny bit, and that will give you more. And let's reassess this conversation in
Yeah.
2 weeks' time. And it grows and it builds. So in summary, the first thing I often do is the why. And then the second thing is what can you do versus what should you do? And
Love
that's
that.
where I come down on, oh, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. And usually I have a smart aleck answer or question. Oh, did you get that from TikTok? Or was that an influencer who was 22 and the genetics of it got it?
Yeah.
What can you do? And I bet you it's good enough for now. And if you do something, you'll have more energy to get up and go and to do a little bit more down the road.
Yeah. I love that answer, right? Just what's the why? And then a little bit, start picking away at just a little bit. And I
Yeah.
know we know that many CEOs and leaders will say we have we're too busy to invest in performance, right? Between family and work and, can't find the time. But I love how you break it down. 4 minutes, 5 minutes. It will make a difference in your day. And, I always laugh, especially, during COVID, we were all so tight of being able to move around. I know the teams that I was working with, I'm like, you have a break. You have 15 minutes between now and your next meeting. Like,
Yeah.
see how, walk on the spot. I'd be saying, do, whatever, sit ups, push ups, whatever. You
Mhm.
hit the floor. They were laughing at that, but it was like, it's 4 or 5 minutes. It's going to
Yeah.
keep us going. It was such an interesting time, both mentally and physically, for so
Mhm.
many people who were working and not working. Like some were working and, were full on all day, every day, and others were not because they couldn't for what they did.
There's a little bit of depressing research, and it's a very strong word, but I think I use it properly. That the more hybrid we work and the more people work remote, the less active we're getting. We actually undervalued the amount of steps it would take to walk from office to office, or if you're
Right.
to walk around the block to get your lunch,
Yeah.
coffee, even anything. A lot of people working from home don't do that anymore. Some people
Right.
do. So some people, at one point at myself, might have their turbo trainer set 4.5 feet off its computer where I can hop online and cycle at any
Yeah.
time. But
Yeah.
my
I've got
point
that
is,
beside me.
a lot of people become sedentary without even realizing it, and it's very important. You made a good point there that some people kind of go, "Oh, I'm too busy to do it, and I
Yeah.
don't have time."
Yeah.
And sometimes I give hard hitting comments to my clients, and I goes, "Well, if you don't have time for your health now, you're going to have to make time for your sickness in the future,
Yeah.
because what you're saying are the habits of a future sick person." And
Yeah.
that really rocks it. And people it's a little bit aggressive. Is it passive aggressive? I'm going, no, well, let's look at the
No.
facts. Sedentary
Yeah.
lifestyle
Yeah.
leads to chronic disease. What you're saying and what you're doing is the habit of someone that's going to be sick in the future.
Yeah.
But we need
Yeah.
to take control now, and it doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be extreme. It just has to be something.
Right. And I think about the amount of research and
Mhm.
practice you've put in play. If you could give one evidence-based recommendation to
Mm.
help think it, let's do it for teams because we talked a little bit on individuals, but we know when whole teams are like it's a, business is a team sport. And so we've got to get everybody, raising their performance levels together.
Yeah.
And we know there's lots of peer accountability when we play in a sport team on a field. It plays out. How do you do it for a business team?
Yeah. I think that wolf pack mentality, and you might have seen this
Yeah.
before, the picture of the wolf pack, and the alpha wolf will actually stay at the back of the pack, and the juvenile
Yeah.
wolves are at the front, and the
Yeah.
alpha wolf has your back as we move
Yes.
forward together. And I often use that picture as a slide in the context of what you're saying here. And I think if we're going to embrace this physical activity and this positive health, nutrition, lifestyle habits and movements in the pursuit of performance, it has to come from the top down. And I feel any leader who is looking for this to be implemented should speak the speak, walk the walk as well,
Yeah.
and to experience things together. And
Yeah.
that can be as
Yeah. I
simple
love that.
walking meetings or getting in and rewarding people or encouraging people. Simple things like the line at the bottom of your email, we don't expect you to reply out of hours or at weekends.
Yes. Yeah.
They're the living.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at. And I some corporate wellness companies would probably say, no, we should all come in and we should all do meditation together for an hour at lunchtime. And a lot of my clients just don't have the time, nor the facilities or the possibilities for that to happen. What I would say is you've got to walk the walk in this scenario, and you have to encourage people to have the opportunity to switch off so they can switch on.
Yeah.
And that can take many
Yeah.
forms. And in different countries, it's different cultures. Even I don't know what the weather is like with you guys at the moment, but I bet it's close to
It's
freezing
going
or
into winter.
yeah. So
Ski
it's
season starts tomorrow.
exactly, which is fantastic. And, you can't
Yes.
take a half day off every day to go skiing. That's not what I'm
Mm.
saying. What I'm saying is that you encourage people
Yeah.
to find that balance, and that is the key to
Yeah. I
this.
love that.
And we spoke earlier about metronomics and we spoke about oscillation. I think a lot of people, we don't have an issue with the challenge and the stress when it comes to the growth equation. We have an issue with the rest part. And that has
Yeah.
to be encouraged and rewarded. And I don't know, do we reward the employees and leaders for regenerating? And I think we
Right.
should.
Right. Yes. I absolutely agree. I'm such a geek on longevity and the numbers and understanding not only for business, but for our human side of things, all the sleep numbers and all that. And I know lots on lots of are. Where can, because you've hit so many things, where can our audience, our listeners learn more about your research, your coaching, and stay
Mhm.
connected to your work?
Yeah, well, I'm not really a social media person, which probably shouldn't come as a surprise because I try to disconnect with that. Where I am active on LinkedIn. So if you find me
Yes.
on my LinkedIn
Okay.
profile, all the podcasts I record, I put them up there. But I also put links up for my research and my current research as well, which I might talk about in a sec, if that's okay, Shannon.
Yes. I would like you to close with that for sure.
Yeah, and I work for the Munster Technological University. We've campuses in Cork and Kerry, and my own business is coachpact.ie. And the PACT, the PACT, stands for Performance, Accountability, Customization, and Time. So I coach you
Love
through
it.
those four elements. And coachpact.ie, I work with a very small stable of clients. I'm heavily involved in research at the moment as I'm pursuing a professional doctorate. And I would, if people are still on the podcast and watching and listening, I would really appreciate if people might consider completing that survey for me, because the people I'm studying, Shannon, I can't get to them with a cold email or a social media post.
Yeah. Yeah.
The reason I'm pushing so hard on this research is that an awful lot of the research on C-suite executives and senior business leaders isn't actually done on C-suite executives and business leaders because they're too busy to fill out surveys. I would look for real impactful research,
Yes.
My research survey is 40 to 60 questions, and it's
Yes.
spanning cognitive domains. But you just touched on it. It looks at health and fitness and nutrition, wearable technology, and a lot of the things that CEOs and leaders are getting a little bit bombarded with at the moment. What I'm trying to do is quieten the noise for senior business leaders and give them real actionable things to do to improve their
Love it.
health, their fitness, their nutrition, their lifestyle, and invariably their cognitive performance. So if people could take the time to fill out that survey, I would be delighted.
Is there an easy URLs that people can find the survey?
I
Can you share it?
I think probably the easiest thing for me to do is to
Yeah.
send you that URL, and maybe we can put it at
And
the
I'll
bottom.
add
I
it.
can-
I will
Yeah,
add it for
and
sure.
that's a direct URL that brings in. It's a fully anonymous survey as well. So and anonymously, and it's guaranteed anonymous. So I can't tell who you are or anything like that. And I find that's really important because people give me real information. I'm getting some great stuff, some really good stuff.
It'll be fascinating, fascinating. And I think today, I think with the leaders that I'm working with, everybody's aware more so than ever. But it's a matter of finding, as you've talked very clearly on, the consistency of the rhythm to keep it going. And, when I think about your work and your focus on performance is not accidental. Right? And it's such a powerful reminder that, I think why when I'm working with my CEOs and my teams is, the rhythm, the Metronomics rhythm isn't just for business, it's for your life as well. And it's designed to train you and your team, because it's a team sport, in order to sustain this performance, both personal and professional, through the systems. And I love it because your research, and I love that Paulo Kelly introduced us, because it aligns, like it gives me goosebumps how much it aligns with Metronomics and the thinking of, and I know you didn't know everywhere where Metronomics came from. It came from sport. And I
Yeah.
just decided to apply it to business. So for those listening in, if you want to grow your business, if you want to start growing with capacity and clarity of your team, you've got to treat your team like corporate athletes, like a team of corporate athletes. And Joe's work is significant in this space. Please, please check out the survey. Give Joe the feedback required, because it's really going to help us all. This is what it's about, being tip top. It's about getting ourselves in the frame of mind that's going to make a difference and the impact we want to make. Thank you for being here, Joe. I could talk to you all day. I know we'll connect again. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I look forward to the next time we connect. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Shannon.